the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions, providing full-service audio solutions for you or your company, no matter how big or small your needs are. That's podcasts, that's radio shows, that's the works, custom content creation, professional recording tools, all the bells and whistles that you need to sound great in any capacity. It's your one-stop shop for all audio needs. Visit AuthenticAudioPro.com today. That's AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Tuesday, May 28th. Bump this back one day for the Memorial Day weekend celebrations. Plenty of sports to watch, plenty of sports to play, plenty of sports to coach. It's been a fun, packed weekend here, but back to the grind. The Pacers are officially exiting stage left for the 2023-24 campaign. I'll focus on a few notable notes, but their offseason that is now officially on the books. We'll talk Ronald Acuna Jr. as well. Man, even as a Mets fan, having to root against that Braves team, you know I've been gushing over their front office work, over the what they've been able to do at the trade deadline, really for 4 straight seasons. And my God, they reinvigorated Chris Sale, the impossible. So to see Acuna go down again, it's been a rough 5-year stretch for him, give or take 2023, of course. We'll detail his contract situation, where it's headed, what the outlook may be for the next iteration of financials for Ronald Acuna Jr. as well. And then just a quick, what's it all look like at the top of the NFL mountain in terms of guaranteed money? We're going to run through all the positions and kind of understand what the markets for guarantees are, because what else matters in a league that does not fully guarantee anything unless you are Deshaun Watson in the weirdest situation still to date. The single situation that nobody talks about. Nobody. We all say, yeah, that was garbage. This is the worst contract in history. We do not talk about how it got there, why it got there, why it still exists. It's so weird. It is one of the biggest elephant in the rooms of all sports. It's just, it's one of those things that even me, I don't even reference the contract when I'm talking about comparison to other players and contract projections. I'm just following suit with what the rest of the league and all the people who follow it closely are doing, which is we're just going to forget like that never happened unless you're a Browns fan and you need him to be an elite all-star quarterback again. And easier said than done there. But anyway, the other top of the markets, positionally speaking, from a guaranteed standpoint, that's the back end of the show. All right. The Boston Celtics did what we thought they would do, knock the Pacers out of the season kind of easily. It kind of felt like they were toying with some rosters down the stretch there. That's how I think offhandish things were, even though, look, these were close games. Jaylen Brown was the best player on the court for much of this. But we had some notables come out of the Indiana side of this, and obviously Halliburton going down allowed for that. You saw some players maybe step into roles that they weren't used to, they haven't been given the opportunity to do for, and there will be some money coming forth because of that. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's just break down what it looks like this offseason for the Pacers. And by the way, Keith Smith's offseason piece on Indiana is forthcoming. He's up to Miami. If you've been following along team by team, Miami's a very interesting team that is now live on SpotTrack.com. What to do with Jimmy Butler, who could be traded, who could be extended, who could be set pat for 2024-25, and we simply just build around him. And maybe that means, the Tyler Heroes of the world, the Duncan Robinsons of the world move off the roster, but a lot of moving parts on that roster. Not so much, I don't think, with Indiana. Halliburton's extension officially kicks in. It's not an all-NBA increase, so it remains at the 245. It does get the all-NBA increase, so it now jumps to 5 years, 245, as we detailed in the last show. He was one of those benefactors of an all-NBA berth this year. So it's a $42.3 million projected salary for 2024. That is by far the biggest on this roster. And I expect Siakam to push past that because he's the big free agent. He's the player you saw really stand out in these past couple of series for Indiana. He holds the big cap hold of nearly $50 million right now. That is leaving the Pacers with about negative $74 million of cap space when you're factoring in all the guaranteed contracts, all the dead cap, and all these cap holds. There's about 110 million of cap holds. For those not familiar, you don't just get to let free agents walk away for nothing in terms of how they account towards your cap in basketball. There is a formula in place, and restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents, everybody has a number. That is one of the big improvements that Keith Smith and Scott, who manage the NBA side of things financially for us, have been able to update. And I think it's been a game changer. All right. We're not just throwing out a bunch of numbers and hoping you can do the math. The NBA cap views on SpotTrack are some of the most intricate, detailed views that we have. They continue to improve. There's percentages for everything because that's much of how this league operates. That's how the CBA tells us we should be operating. It's how contracts are constructed from the maximum level down. And cap holds are a big part of it. You can hate them. I hate them. Okay. I understand why they're there. It alleviates the ability for teams to just tank and flip and do exactly what they want to do. It puts the onus on the team with rights to say, look, Pascal Siakam is still a member of the Indiana Pacers until I believe it's July 6th or 7th. I don't have the date in front of me, but whenever that official new league year starts, he will then be an official unrestricted free agent. He can negotiate a few days forward. There's that moratorium just like the NFL has. So plenty of time for the Pacers to get something done. But if it gets to that point, the only way for the Pacers to officially get this $49.3 million cap hold off of their books is there's three ways. Extend him. Now he's on a new contract with a new cap number that replaces the cap hold. He walks away in free agency and signs elsewhere. New cap number somewhere else. No longer need for a hold with the Pacers. That drops down to zero from their standpoint. Or, and this happens with some of the lower cap holds that you'll see on all these team pages, they renounce the rights. In other words, they have the rights to these players. That's something that you earn based on longevity and drafting and all that stuff. They renounce the rights. The cap hold goes away. That player is now 100% officially free to sign anywhere else in the league at whatever cost is available to him based on his experience. So those are the options. That's why the cap holds exist, because in order to have rights, they have to pay for those rights. And those payments come case by case, player by player. For a player like Siakam, it's nearly $50 million over the next 2 months until we get to the actual league year, and or Siakam is extended. Probably the most likely scenario here. Speaking of which, Halliburton's guaranteed 5-year contract is now in the books. Miles Turner, fully guaranteed at just under $20 million next year. Those are the big two. All right. Not named Siakam, who we just talked about. Those are the big two. Miles Turner cannot be extended. Here's why. And again, for the NFL people listening, this may intrigue you. Miles Turner cannot be extended because he signed a 2-year contract extension about 18 months ago. It was a renegotiation. It's a 2-year deal. And that's the point here. Players on contracts that are less than 3 years of length cannot extend within the confines of that contract. Okay. You have to wait until after the contract expires. There's a cap hold in place, and then you can start to do your dirty work. So Miles Turner is not available, not eligible to be extended right now through the next full season. So we know where this is headed. Okay. He's going to be the next guy up because he had a great postseason. He has his limitations. You can understand why he's been both an extension candidate and a trade candidate multiple times in his career. All right. He's now 28 years old, heading toward 2024. But he can play and he can shoot the three as a big man. He's doing all the things you want him to do in the modern game. And he's pretty stout defensively as well, obviously. So having him at less than 20 million is a benefit. Knowing that he cannot be extended kind of benefits Indiana for 2024 because, the things are going to start to pile up here quickly with names like TJ McConnell, with names like Andrew Nembhard, two players who were obvious standouts in this postseason. Both those players are extension eligible. Now, Nembhard is entering year 3 of his rookie contract, right? So he's got year 3, he's got year 4 on a club option. Generally speaking, a player that looks like him wouldn't be extension eligible until after year 3, heading towards year 4. However, this is a player who was drafted number 31 overall in the second round, which alleviates the first round rights. Okay. It makes him available to extend right now after his second season, which is the standard eligibility level for any extension in terms of veterans in the NBA. That's something they've done with second rounders that benefits players that are lightning in a bottle like this. Not to the degree of Giannis or Joker, obviously, but a player that can stand out now has the ability to do this. Oh, by the way, another thing the NFL should think about. I love it. All right. Why are we pigeonholing all these players into 3 years of rookie contract status if some of them earn the ability to not do that? I love it. So this is a bit of a crossover conversation as I'm starting to not just learn, but be reminded of some of these extension rules and the drafting rules that go along with the NBA. A situation that I said before, I think really handles their financials well. It's complicated, it's ugly, it's crazy nerdy. And I think it really attracts the mathematics side of people who follow this kind of stuff, right? The NFL is fluffy, right? That's the word I continue to use. Fluffy. It's getting much better. It's getting smaller and more confined. But what if these kind of restrictions existed, right? What if it existed that if you signed a contract, you couldn't sign a contract till X years? What if there was a deal where if you had a small contract, you couldn't be extended out of that contract? You were basically going to go to free agency, right? What if instead of franchise tags, we had cap holds? I think about these things quite a bit and how different it would be and how it's obviously never going to get there. But I do think that the NBA is doing things a little bit cleaner. Now, would the maximum contract structure work in the NFL? I don't know, right? You wouldn't be able to give Patrick Mahomes his unicorn contract. That's certainly something we've talked about with the LeBrons and the Jokers and all these outstanding top tier players. So you're suppressing the ability for them to make their money. And I realize that's ridiculous, knowing that many of these guys are about to sign $70 million contracts per year, as we talked about with Scott. So I'm not sure that would cross over too much. But back to the Indiana Pacers. Miles Turner not extension eligible. Tyrese Halliburton just officially extended. That locks in and kicks in this season. So the big candidates heading into the offseason here are McConnell, who's got about a $9 million salary for the upcoming season. It's the final year of his contract. They could have extended him last year. They decided not to. He obviously played himself into a situation where he's more valuable today than he was 12 months ago. Whether that's worth keeping and extending remains to be seen. Like I said, they have to kind of stagger this process. They know what's coming here in the next couple of years. And, oh, by the way, Halliburton's injury history, not great. So it's probably a really tough ask to start to lock in many of these players. They had the opportunity to extend 4 players last fall. The only one they locked in was Nesmith at $11 million per year for 3 years. That starts this season as well. Looks like Nembhard's going to get more minutes than him, but even at $11 million a year, I don't think anybody's going to gawk at that contract. So, in other words, they have slow played things just to a certain degree. The Halliburton contract, right? The acquisition and then the extension that turns into the designated extension. That's very unlike Indiana. So they have started to break the mold a little bit. So, and if I'm kind of paraphrasing Keith Smith's notes for what's coming in his piece, and I know it's going to be a doozy, it's how much will they let the chains off, right? How much toward the tax, over the tax will this team eventually get themselves into? And will they start that process this year, knowing that you want to get eligibilities locked in, you want to be able to have trade restrictions lifted so that if the wheels fall off this thing, all right, you can move Nembhard in 12 months, et cetera, et cetera. You want flexibility, you want assets, you want options. And if you try to do everything all at once, as we've seen with many of these other sports, that's generally a recipe for massive disaster. So I would expect some sort of extension to happen this offseason. Certainly in the Siakam camp, I don't believe that they acquired him as a rental piece by any regard. Whether or not that's going to be a max remains to be seen. I would assume he and Halliburton will be the max contracts on the books. I assume TJ McConnell will get some sort of Nesmith-like offer to extend out. If he's in the $9.5 million range right now, do they have to nearly double that? That's probably too rich for their blood for a player that really isn't playing all of the crucial minutes, especially in certain those series where Rick Collar decided he was better off not being a defensive liability at times. Fascinating, though. Really interesting cast of characters that when it's all working, really was one of the best shooting teams in all of basketball the whole year, including in the postseason. There were certain times during this postseason where it didn't matter what the other team was doing, that whether it's the Knicks, etc. Didn't matter how feisty, how good defensively they were. when you're hitting jump shots at the degree that they were hitting them in certain areas, that's indefensible. And they are going to outscore you. So they have that. Will they try to become a more balanced team? Will they try to become a more defensive-minded team? Easier said than done in an offseason. But they may have some bullets to shoot, right? They may have some shooters that they can send out there on the trade block and attempt to acquire a more gadget player that is a shutdown defender, that is less about offense, more about defense. Like I said, easier said than done. But that's probably the mindset. More so running it back, a little bit of extension for the future. Nothing crazy. Certainly retaining Siakam services. I believe Obi Toppin did enough. He's a restricted free agent to warrant some sort of multi-year extension, probably to the 3 to 4 year degree. Again, looking for Keith's piece in a couple of days or weeks here to reference exactly what these contracts might look like. But those are the kind of names we'll be hearing about with Indiana this offseason. I don't think it'll be too much of a rock the boat situation. And I think internally, that's exactly what they want. They want the chance to develop and grow one more offseason together, to be able to come back now with this playoffs experience, which is so damn useful in this league. You have to kind of go through the pain to go and really take a shot at the pleasure, which I think Minnesota and certainly Indiana are going through right now. And we'll have probably a very similar conversation about the Minnesota Timberwolves here in just a couple of days, if and when Dallas is able to push the envelope there and get them past the finish line, which I believe is highly expected at this point in time. By the way, Luka went through his year, right? Western Conference Finals, super disappointing. There was a lot of talk about his actual ability to get to the finish line, and here we are. Luka has gone through that once, and now it appears like nothing is standing in his way, and that may include Boston, if that's where we're headed next. So fascinating how that continues to be the trend in the NBA. It's really just not about throwing together a bunch of young kids who are crazy athletic, who can shoot the hell out of the ball, and letting it all happen in June and July. It's just not that way. It's just not that way. All right. There's a point of demarcation in this league where you have to know exactly what's coming in front of you to be mentally prepared for it, certainly be physically prepared for it. And it seems like that there's a cutoff line with a bunch of these young kids that get to this point. Even the most arrogant, talented, skillful players get knocked on their ass here at least once before coming back and getting to the finish line. So it's nothing against any of these teams. And a healthy Halliburton, I would assume, tips the scale on maybe one or two of these games, because they were all close. Boston was not running away with anything here. And I would imagine they're going to be the runaway favorites here in terms of odds to finish out this finals run. So fascinating how it gets there. The cap space is not great. They have tax space. They have some cap holds. I assume they'll renounce for free agent purposes, but Obi Toppin, Pascal Siakam likely back in the fold on extensions. Probably Nembhard and or McConnell, at least in discussions for an extension. It's early on both, in my opinion. Miles Turner cannot be extended. Halliburton's extension starts this season. That is your Indiana Pacers offseason in terms of a paraphrase version. Again, keep an eye out on Spotrac.com for Keith Smith's detailed novel version, much more detailed, intricate, projected version of the Indiana Pacers coming very, very shortly on Spotrac.com. Ronald Acuna Jr. You hate to see it. The whole baseball world hates to see it. He's just one of those players that, a guy that can hit 50 home runs, who can steal 70 bases, who could do a little bit of everything, makes unbelievable outfield plays. He's sort of that, if you're of any kind of age where baseball was the sport, and I'm of that age, yes, I grew up with the NFL. Yes, I grew up with the NBA, even some NHL where I reside, but I grew up with baseball as the sport. I played it. I watched it. I kind of loved it. I was wearing the t-shirts. I was wearing the jerseys, right? And it was the Griffies. It was all those players that did everything. They were five-tool in all regard. That is Acuna. He's kind of an old school dude. And he's 26 years old. All right. And he is just doing things that the game isn't allowing other people to do. He carried an 8.14 WAR last year as a five-tool player, right? He's not going up there bashing 60 home runs like Judge. He's doing this with doubles, 35, with homers, 41, with stolen bases, 73. Okay. With batting average, 337, with a 1.01 OPS. It's just across the board. And that's not even the defensive stats that I referenced there. He did everything for the Braves last year, and he won the MVP. Here's the last 5 seasons of Ronald Acuna Jr., however. We start with 2020, the COVID year for everybody. Acuna got 46 games in. Okay, it sucks for everybody. There's nothing we can do about it. It sucks for everybody. Trout's stats were deflated. Judge's stats, everybody was deflated because of that year, unfortunately. And that's the least of people's concerns when it comes to COVID, but it's part of the story. So that's 5 years ago, 2020, 46 games. Year after that, 2021, he played half a season, 82 games, tore his ACL. It was the left ACL back then. 2022, he's still recovering. He gets about 120 games in, but he's kind of a shell of himself. We're all collectively wondering, is this player going to get back to full form? And then 2023 happens. You just heard the numbers. He played 160 games and won the MVP. Yep. Yes. Postseason bailout. All that stuff happens with Braves. It happens with lots of teams. But Acuna was the guy last year, 100% back to full form. The expectations were through the roof with him and the Braves this season because of some acquisitions, because you had a core group that was now nicely paid collectively, that is now 1 year better, got knocked out of the postseason last year. You know, they're pissed. That's generally a recipe for good success in 2024. And now here we are 50 games in, and Acuna Jr. tears the other ACL. I guess that's the 1% of silver lining in all of this, is that it's not the same ACL. I don't know if that's better or worse from a rehab standpoint. All I know is tearing the same ACL twice has to be worse than tearing each ACL once. That's just Dr. Mike saying this out loud, thinking from an athletic standpoint. I assume that's positive news if you need some kind of positive news. Can the Braves withstand this? Yes, they can. They can win games, enough games to be a playoff contender and a legitimate NL pennant contender. Yes, against the Dodgers. Yes, against the Phillies, even without Ronald Acuna Jr. Will they go and make a bunch of trades to try to fill his stats? I don't think so. I think this is one of those situations where you would know exactly what you just lost. You look around the bench. Maybe you look to your minor leagues, which they've already started to do, and you just hope you can recapture 75% of it. You're not going to get the dynamic player. You're not going to get the stolen bases. You're not going to get, 2 of the 5 tools that Acuna brings you. Let's put it that way, because that's just what an average player looks like. But I don't believe that they're going to overreact to this from a roster construction standpoint. Will they make moves at the deadline? Hell yeah, they always do. It's just how this front office operates. They do not sit on their hands. They could be 30 games up in the NL East or 8 games back. They're going to make moves to improve, because if they're in it, they're going to try to become the best version of themselves. They're not going to try to, counter something that the Phillies have done, or certainly what the Mets have done with $300 million over the past 2 seasons. They're just going to be who they are. And for better or for worse, it's been good enough to win the division. It's been good enough to become at least a top seed in the postseason. And it just hasn't been enough to get to the finish line for better or for worse. So I don't think it's an overreaction to the team. Should we start to consider overreacting to the player with 2 ACLs in 3 seasons, a lack of full season production for much of his career outside of 2023, which we hope isn't just the unicorn one-time happening, right? We want this player to be doing this multiple times throughout a decade, so that we can remember him for the MVP seasons and not so much the inconsistency because of injuries. Something that I think that's what Mike Trout has become, right? I think when you think about Mike Trout now, it isn't about how he's going to have the highest WAR in the history of baseball. It isn't about how he was a Hall of Famer 6 years into his career, right? It's not going to be about the $450 million contract. It's going to be about how injuries took away much of his career, much of his at-bats, his production. Not to mention, if he stays with that team and never wins, that'll certainly be the conversation, right? The Ohtani stuff, the lack of playoff appearances, etc. But I don't want Acuna to get there. And I'm worried about it. He plays recklessly. Bryce Harper went through this, and they basically had to say to Bryce Harper, you're literally going to take yourself out of this game career-wise if you continue to play at this pace. We are not going to tell you to change. We just want you to know it. We just want you to understand that this is what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to play for 13, 14 years if this is how you're going to play through your late 20s and into your 30s. And I think this is probably the wake-up call that Acuna Jr. needs, right? You could probably push through the first ACL situation, but the second one in 4 years, this has to be the biggest of wake-up calls to him. Contractually speaking, we've talked about the contract quite a bit. It's an 8-year, $100 million contract. He signed it before the end of his first season, so he was well into the first pre-arb stance. Something we've seen more contracts do. There's a yin and a yang conversation here. Okay, I'll tell you how much is left, and then we'll talk about the other side of this. $11.5 million left this year, 17 next year, 17 in 2026, a $17 million club option in 2027, and another $17 million club option in 2028. Okay. He gets through all of that. We just assume that's going to happen because, logic says it's going to happen through another 4.5 years. He'll be 31 years old at the end of this contract. As long as he hasn't torn another ACL, or something as serious, knock on wood, he's going to re-up. Okay. We're seeing the majority of powerhouse free agents enter free agency at 30, heading towards 31. Pete Alonso, Aaron Judge, etc. It's just where we are now. Okay. With service time manipulation, with players going through college and then eventually getting to it with whatever it's taking. Okay. Now we're having a moment as well where 22-year-olds are kind of dominating the game too. So I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you the majority of free agents that actually get to free agency are about this age. So you can kind of look at Acuna Jr. and say, yeah, they bought out 4 years of your free agency, but here we are. And you're not old enough where teams are going to be scared away of a 6, 7, 8-year contract if he's healthy and playing even a semblance of what he's shown us for the past couple of seasons. So I'm not crazy worried about Acuna Jr.'s career. I'm not crazy worried about him getting that second big contract yet. But it's on the radar. It has to be. It has to be on the radar. If you remember, Mike Trout didn't get to the end of his bridge contract. Okay, he did the unthinkable with the Angels. And it's probably the reason he's sticking around. They ripped it up. They said, all right, yeah, we know you've got X dollars left for the next 3 years, but we also know exactly what you are. All right, you could retire right now, be a Hall of Famer, and we can do nothing about it. So in order to avoid that, and in order to stop you from probably a trade request every offseason for the foreseeable future, we're going to do the unthinkable. And we're going to take a guaranteed contract, rip it up, and give you a brand new guaranteed contract for 12 years at $455 million or whatever it is, $435, I think. Still historic. And that's what he's living on right now. And oh, by the way, thank God he did that because the injuries started to pile up almost a second and a half later. And that's the other side of this Acuna conversation. We've been talking about all these players that are extending early, whether it's pre-arb, whether it's arbitration, buying out some free agency years. Cousin Dan and I have had case-by-case conversations about what's good, what's bad, who should be doing this. Should these Orioles players start to consider, locking in? Bobby Witt Jr. finally did it, and he's having his breakout season. And we continually reference this Acuna Jr. contract because look at what he's become. All right. And he can max out at $123 million over 10 seasons. Okay. Do the math. It's very Braves friendly. Let's put it that way. However, this would have been arbitration 4. This would have been the final year of arbitration for Ronald Acuna Jr. He would have been a free agent in December. And he would have been recovering from a torn ACL, his second. That is not the resume you want as a 26-year-old player heading toward free agency. Would he have been paid? Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and think that there wouldn't be 10 teams offering him $300 million plus this December. It would have happened. But maybe not. And you never know when baseball owners are going to come together and say, we can't do this anymore. It happened about 8 years ago, and it's slowly started to improve and improve and improve because the young talent has just forced it to improve. But at some point in time, players like this aren't going to get those big contracts because they're going to be labeled as injury prone, and they're just not going to get it. The whole league pushed back on Carlos Correa until the Twins, offered a modified version of what they were originally offering. We've had instances of superstar players be basically told thanks, but no thanks by basically every team in baseball. I don't think that would happen here, but I want to put it in your mind that Acuna Jr. has 17 plus 17 plus 17 plus 17 on the books that he wouldn't have had if he just ran out his arbitration, never signed the extension, and was waiting for free agency. That's the risk. That's why you're seeing so many of these young players do this, because having $100 million guaranteed at age 22 is a heck of a lot better than having $50 million through arbitration and then hoping you hit the right timing, hoping you have the perfect storm. The Aaron Judge situation is a 10 out of 10. Okay. It's just exactly what you're looking for. For 1 year, he didn't get injured at all. He was an absolute mammoth from a batting average standpoint, from a defensive standpoint, and from a home run standpoint. I don't know what else he could ask for in this game. And he walked into the winter with basically blank checks from every team possible. Okay. That's what you're hoping for. But that's a hell of a lot to hope for. That everything works out perfectly the exact season you need it to. Right? After 7 years after service manipulation, right? 7 years of all this grinding and marathons of seasons and injury here and injury there and days off here. And that for one season, you have to get it right. That's what 24 would have been for Acuna Jr. Now, if he was the MVP last year, coming off of free agency this year, right? Had he headed for free agency this year, everybody in the world would look at this and say, all right, he got injured, but look at last year. All right. It was close enough proximity wise where he would have been paid. Let's be honest. But it's still a reference point worth making. It's still a reference point for Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson and all these players that are breaking out. Hell, Corbin Carroll is a shell of himself a day and a half after the World Series. Okay. He signed basically with 0 at-bats in the league. He signed. And now he's really struggling. From an injury standpoint, from a consistency standpoint, he's going to figure it out. Everybody's going to figure it out. There's plenty of time. He's a kid, but there's a hell of a lot more reasons to extend early than not to, in my opinion. And even for one of the best players in the world, in Acuna Jr., the timing was not on his side. Having this contract on the books is definitely better than not for most players. So, as you're thinking about these young kids evolving into the game, Paul Skeens, we had a discussion on that a couple of weeks ago. If you see them sign for, I think we had Skeens at like 8 for 150, something like that. Basically a modern version of the Acuna contract for a pitcher. If you see him sign and you think to yourself, man, that dude left $200 million on the table, you're probably right, but think of it as insurance. Okay? Think of it as insurance. At some point in time, you just have to put safety first. Okay. You just have to put in the ability to say, I need to put myself in a situation where I'm guaranteeing at least this much, knowing that, especially for a pitcher, right? Knowing that Tommy John's coming, elbow soreness is coming. Okay. It's just part of the process now. And in Acuna Jr., a player who plays reckless, the injuries are going to come. So kudos to him for taking a contract when he did. He was kind of one of the pioneers of this thing. So yes, it's significantly less than it probably should have been, and good on the Braves in that regard. But again, he could be a player walking towards free agency, rehabbing an ACL, and he's not. He's a player with 4 years at $17 million per year left, and a player who's going to be 31, maybe with a couple of MVPs at that point, probably about to break the bank on his third contract. So unique situation, crazy situation. We feel bad for him. I personally can't feel too bad for the Braves, but as a lover of baseball, I hate this for the game as a whole. Okay, let's get to some NFL numbers. This is going to be quick and dirty. Certainly, this is information you can find on Spot Track at the NFL Rankings View, but it's always good to talk this stuff out at times because it changes rapidly, and that's kind of the point, is we're headed toward extension season. A lot of these front offices will go on vacation over the next couple of weeks, so there will be a bit of a break, but that won't stop agents and GMs from negotiating back and forth, whether they're sitting with a Mai Tai and Cabo, whatever's going to happen, right? It's not going to stop the business from at least being negotiated, and then we'll see a hell of a lot of contracts hit in July. Keep in mind, by the way, June 1st, 3 days away, the post-June 1st designations will process. More than a few teams will get some cap space. We'll run that out on Thursday's episode with Brandon and give you all the numbers that are forthcoming for the weekend when that actually happens. So teams are waiting for that out. Teams are waiting OTAs out to see what they have with some of the rookies. At some point in time, the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases, the Tua Tagovailoas, the Trevor Lawrence's, etc. We've talked about him at nauseum, right? Maybe Dak, maybe Micah Parsons, probably CeeDee Lamb. There's a dozen, maybe even closer to 24 players that may get contract extensions at slightly before, maybe a little bit into training camp, which is what, 2 months away, middle of July, end of July. So we're getting there. There's a lot of reset the market situations as well, right? I expect Tua's numbers to be near the top. If Dak hits, it's going to be at the top, pretty much across the board. CD, Justin Jefferson, at the top, pretty much across the board. Tristan Wirfs, at the top of the offensive line money, across the board. Micah Parsons, if that gets to fruition, I don't think it's coming, but that would be one. That would be right with Nick Bosa, across the board. So it's going to happen at some point in time. Whether they all happen this offseason remains to be seen, but certainly we haven't had a juicier list of notable extension candidates in quite some time, and it's been lingering, right? I think we had Dak and Lamar Jackson for like a 2-year stretch, kind of like on an island. It's all we could talk about. We got like 15 players that are all worthy of our time and conversation, and their contracts are going to be phenomenal. So I'm going to be a busy man this summer when these all hit. Extrapolating these numbers, understanding the guts of them and the structure of them, and taking the fluff out of them. But until then, these are your guaranteed top of the mountain players, positionally speaking. I'm going to give you the full guarantee. We've talked about it before. The guarantee at signing is a little bit more of a stable number to offer. However, so many of these contracts now are saying guaranteed now, more guaranteed 1 year early. They called them guaranteed vesting mechanisms in Patrick Mahomes forever ago. And that's kind of been what everybody else has started to do, because it's a really good trend to copy. It is. It's a strength, stable way to guarantee money without guaranteeing at signing. And the reason that's important is because the guaranteed at signing number is what the owner has to put into escrow immediately upon signing the paperwork. Okay. So it's an important number to the organization. So if you can push that out, even 1 to 2 years of guaranteed money, if you can roll those into future early vesting mechanisms, it helps the ownership out, and it's still basically just as stable for the player. Now we're seeing some, Russell Wilson is not getting next year's salary. Let's put it that way. Okay. He got paid this year to not earn next year's salary. So that's an example of a early vesting mechanism that was deleted by Denver, by the Walmart money. That's not going to be common, I don't think, but it's possible. So that's why guaranteed signing is still as stable as you can get. More and more players are getting the good guaranteed signing number, but plenty more available next March, the March after that, the March after that, for 1 year early. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, I know I'm not supposed to talk about Deshaun Watson, but Deshaun Watson, $230 million is still the top guaranteed money for quarterbacks. We're getting there. Joe Burrow's over 219. I don't know if Tua is going to get past that one. I don't think Trevor Lawrence will. All right. Dak probably can. If Dak signs a full 5-year extension, and that would be hard pressed, he's generally trying to truncate as much as possible. But if Dak signs an extension, maybe not. If Dak goes to free agency next year, I would expect Dak to be at the top of this conversation. And that's, I would actually put money on that, actually. Okay. Running backs. You may have heard of this guy. It's been Christian McCaffrey's $38 million in chains for quite a long time. In fact, the top 2 contracts in terms of running back guarantees have been on the books for quite a long time. Christian McCaffrey signed his extension, ready? In April 13th of 2020. COVID was a baby at that point in time when McCaffrey got his money. Alvin Kamara and his 33, almost 34 million guaranteed, signed his contract September 12th of 2020. Those are the top 2 guarantees in terms of running backs. Both contracts were signed almost 4 full years ago. So Jonathan Taylor's 26.5. That's the modern running back contract. That's the modern guarantee. That's kind of the bar that everybody's. No running back sitting in a negotiation room right now is going to be thinking about McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara. It's Jonathan Taylor's $26.5 million. That is the new bar, similar to what we've been doing at the quarterback position with Watson's number. Okay. Like I'm telling you, most teams, I would assume most agents are being instructed to just throw that 230 out the window like it never happened. Joe Burrow's 219, I guess, is the more realistic number right now. Wide receivers. AJ Brown's recent contract in Philadelphia at $84 million was by a long shot, by $7 million, reset the market over St. Brown's contract in Detroit this past offseason. So it's been another good year for that. And we're not even close to done with some of these names that I threw out there already. Tight ends. Okay. We've had a good and bad. We've had goods and bads at this position. It's been positive. It's been negative. But when TJ Hawkinson signed his contract, I thought that was a very good sign that the needle continues to move forward, especially on a team that had, at that point, Cousins paid and Justin Jefferson's contract was coming. They still decided to give Hawkinson over $40 million guaranteed, which put him past George Kittle at the top of that mountain. Offensive line, Penei Sewell in Detroit just obliterated this thing. It was Andrew Thomas's $67 million for the Giants, a number I thought was well-deserved. He had really good seasons on a couple of bad Giants teams. And Sewell just took it to another stratosphere. Okay. He's getting $85 million. This is a right tackle that we eventually think he's going to play left tackle, maybe even this season. Okay. So we understand the crossover there, but for a right tackle to be sitting at the top of this list at $85 million, which is 18 million more than any other offensive lineman has on the books right now. That's wild. Tristan Wirfs is going to blow this thing out of the water. Should blow this thing out of the water. If this ends up being $86 million for Wirfs, it's been an unsuccessful negotiation, in my opinion. He is markedly better. He's already shown he can be a guard, a right tackle, and a left tackle. He's played left tackle successfully. Okay. So I believe fully that Tristan Wirfs will blow this number out of the water, but maybe there's some teams, maybe Tampa Bay in that front office looks at the Sewell contract and says, that's just reckless. There's no reason for Sewell's number to be 15 million more than any other lineman in history, but it is. So that's the number now. Edge defenders. We mentioned it before. Nick Bosa at 122.5. That's a big enchilada. Okay. It's 22.5 million more than Myles Garrett, who came in at a nice clean 100. I think Micah Parsons is still on track to blow this out of the water, but he kind of fell off the grid a little bit last year. So maybe give it one more offseason, get yourself through year 4, head towards that 5th-year option and negotiate that way. Though with these Dallas contracts, should we expect anybody to extend early in Dallas anymore? I just don't know if it's possible. Defensive tackles. It's been a really nice couple of off seasons at this position. Obviously, Chris Jones, after the holdout, after the renegotiation, now finally got it done this past March. $95 million guaranteed. It's $14 million more than any other defensive tackle on the books. And number 2 and number 3 just signed. Christian Wilkins with the Raiders, Justin Matabuke back with Baltimore. So it's been a really nice reset of that market over the past couple of off seasons. Josh Allen's, the linebackers, re-up is the top linebacker. That's an outside edge rusher, of course. That's $88 million. TJ Watt, Brian Burns right with him. Burns got that new contract as well. In terms of off-ball linebackers, Roquan Smith staying with Baltimore at $60 million is the top number there. And I don't really see a path forward to somebody really even approaching that right now, though. We'll have to do some work on who's coming up in that market. That's a market that's sliding quickly, though, unfortunately. We'll have to keep an eye on that one. Cornerbacks. Denzel Ward still sits at the top by quite a bit, actually, at $71.25 million. L'Jarius Sneed, I thought, could at least come near that. He didn't even come close with this Tennessee contract, $51.5 million. This market has been a little bit deflated in terms of actual substance of contracts. Couple of reasons. Number 1, the whole secondary has been slightly deflated. Number 2, though, these guys are signing early extensions and not long extensions, right? So that would eliminate the ability for big numbers in terms of guarantees. Doesn't necessarily mean that the majority of the contract isn't guaranteed from a percentage standpoint. Just means because of the length of the contract, the actual dollar amounts aren't as high. With that said, I expect somebody to come in and top this thing soon. I don't think it's going to happen this offseason. We don't have that kind of player on the market right now, or at least approaching the market. We'll see where we get in March and April in terms of what's going to come next. Safeties. Antoine Winfield Jr. just obliterated this thing. $45 million fully guaranteed, taking over Derwin James, who held the spot for 3 off seasons, actually. So this was a much needed refresh at the safety market. Justin Tucker remains by $4 million, the top guaranteed kicker in all of football. That's in football history, actually. And Michael Dixon with Seattle is the top punter at $7.5 million guaranteed. don't think there's a situation that should get re-upped at any point in time. Though, by the way, Harrison Butker approaching a contract extension eligibility situation with Kansas City. Not sure if that's something they want to throw money at. Yes, he's got some polarizing off the field stuff. He's still one of the best kickers in all of football. And we have a kicker holdout in Eddie Pinheiro in Carolina. I guess there's a world where a 4-year extension for him comes with $18 million guaranteed, which makes him at the top of this list. I don't expect that to happen, though. That's it. That's your top guarantees. We'll have all this stuff available on spotrac.com. Up to date as things change, as things happen, and we expect big things to happen. Maybe not so much soon, but coming down the pipeline as the summer progresses toward training camp. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Track Podcast.